Hi, I'm Becca Briggs. I'm Deputy Director for Household Resilience at the ONS, the Office for National Statistics. So I work on the wealth statistics side of what we're talking about today. So my division covers a whole range of things, obviously sort of stats in the name of the office as a whole. We produce a whole range of things, looking at things like household income, expenditure, but wealth is what we'll focus on today. Jen, I don't know if you want to give any kind of immediate intro or should we move on quick?
So I'm Jen. I'm kind of Becca's counterpart, and I run the division that lead all of the ONS's household and social survey. So one of my teams is the wealth and assets team, who are responsible for the maintenance and processing and production of the wealth and assets survey.
Brilliant. So you've got us as a double act, but covering that kind of whole almost production chain, right from collection of the survey through to the statistics. So while the topic today is obviously wealth and assets, we thought we would just start by a little bit of the wider context of the ONS right now. So moving sort of on to the next slide. There's been quite a lot of change recently at the ONS and quite a few challenges as well. So I thought it was helpful to just zoom out for a moment to talk a bit about that, so that when we then get on to talking about what we are doing and focusing on right now around the wealth and asset survey and the production of wealth statistics, it gives you a bit of that broader context, and I think also really helpful for the sort of discussant and table discussion part session later. So over sort of recent months, like I said, been quite a few changes to the leadership. So we've had a change in the national statistician, with Emma Rourke currently the interim acting national statistician, and a new permanent secretary, Darren Tierney, take over leadership of the ONS itself. And that followed obviously quite a few kind of reports into what ONS is doing, some of the challenges we're facing right now, including a review by Sir Robert Devereux a few months ago. So there has been a real recognition that what ONS needs to focus on is our core statistics. And that's particularly in the context where we know, and obviously we have feedback from our users, that some of the key economic statistics that we produce aren't currently meeting user expectations. So that's something we are really focusing on. So back in June, we published 2 detailed plans setting out the improvements that we plan to make to our data collection and statistical production to help us address those and to also help us add resilience for the future. So one was the plan for ONS economic statistics, aiming to restore confidence and improve the quality of our core statistics. And another was the survey's improvement and enhancement plan. So setting out a roadmap to restore confidence in survey operations and data quality. So just to kind of set that scene, like there's a lot happening right now, a lot that we are focusing on, and that is really kind of looking back in at core statistics and data production. So I'm just going to talk very briefly about the left-hand box on that slide, the plan for ONS economic statistics and what that covers, before Jen running us through the survey side of things. So some of you may have read through the plan in more detail. In fact, I know some of you have, but possibly not all. So here is just a sort of very brief summary of what that is focusing on. And again, that kind of theme of what we are looking at is trying to ensure that the investment is focused on the right places. So the plan has set out a series of key themes that we will be really looking at over the next few years across our economic statistics. And that is in the figure on the right. So at a high level, one of the things that you'll probably see there is that it doesn't drill down specifically into wealth, which is what we're talking about today, but it is focusing on some of those kind of high level or broader statistics like national accounts and GDP, trade, core population statistics, as they underpin a lot of what we do. Within that, what we are looking to do over the next few years are focus on things like legacy IT systems and how we can improve that, looking to make our statistical production teams more sustainable, and trying to move to an emphasis on continuous improvement. So making sure that we are focusing on iterative improvements over time more than some of the large-scale transformation that we've perhaps focused on in the past. So, like I said, that's kind of a really brief summary of the economic side. So I'll hand to Jen now to talk about surveys.
So again, as Becca said, just zooming out a bit and talking to you a little bit about the wider context that we're operating in. So across all of our household surveys, and this is an industry-wide challenge, we are facing, as you know, declining response rates. We have the respondent factor, so people are less engaged in surveys, they're more mistrusting of the government, there's less of the kind of civic duty thing, alongside growing operational costs and more requirements for more granular data, and trying to balance all of those things is as I said, given us an industry-wide challenge across social surveys. So there's just a couple of examples on the slide that you can see. So the Wealth and Asset Survey on the left, the response rates over the last 5 published rounds are going down, and also just to show that wider context, the LFS, the Labour Force Survey response rates over the last 10 years, showing that steady decline. The pandemic accelerated that, and we've struggled to recover since then. So Becca mentioned the survey's improvement and enhancement plan, the IEP as we're calling it in-house. And I just wanted to share with you the 4 kind of main strands of that we are focusing on. So first of all, there's been a external public recognition that we haven't invested enough in our data collection. For those of you that watched the PACAC commentary, that was discussed at length there. So one of the things we know we need to do is really focus on that recovery and really invest in sustainable field operations. And I'll talk in a second a little bit about the progress we've made so far and what we're doing this year. So that's about improving the capacity and capability across our interviewer communities. Secondly, as I mentioned, we know that there's a kind of evolving respondent factor, and we know that we need to invest more in refreshing our relationship with the respondent and the citizen, particularly around improving their trust in us and our brand recognition as the ONS, and doing more to communicate the importance of taking part in our surveys with a kind of new society than where we were 10 years ago. Thirdly, we have improved survey and statistical design. So we know that we have lots of work to do around not just the data collection part, but our kind of end-to-end survey process. So making the questionnaires more streamlined, for example. We know that we've got a real thing about respondent burden, but also thinking about things like accessibility of our surveys. Are we reaching the right groups and all of that kind of stuff? And then fourthly, Becca's already mentioned this, but technology is obviously a big thing. So we know that and I'll come on to this more specifically around the Wealth and Asset Survey, but there are challenges in the technology that we use and trying to keep up to date with technology and improving our systems and processes to make them as efficient and agile as possible. So in terms of what those things mean in practice, the middle box there shows you the progress we've made to date, and the bottom box is what we're aiming to try and do this year, which the Survey Improvement and Enhancement Plan is focusing on, what we're doing in 25-26. So in terms of sustainable field operations, at our lowest point, which was around autumn 2023, we had only 517 interviewers in the field. We're now at around 850, and we're aiming to get to over 1,000 by April 2026 in order to fully work all of our surveys as they should be worked. And that maybe sounds simple, but it's actually a really gargantuan effort to double the size of our field community and all of the kind of structure that has to go around that. So double the amount of line managers, our systems have to be able to cope with that influx of new people, and just the pure fact of having like 50% of the field community potentially or more being new to the organisation and new to the field is a real challenge. But we're making really good progress. We've looked at the way that we recruit interviewers, because we know we have a challenge around recruiting the right kind of people. And we've also introduced something we're calling coaching and learning partners, where we're focusing on the quality of the interviewing that the interviewers are doing, and providing kind of one-to-one support or team sessions or that kind of stuff to make sure that all of those new interviewers and our existing interviewers have the skills and the support they need to do the interviewing to the best possible quality. And then just in terms of the other thing that we are looking at this year is a new way of recognising interviewers, where currently they're treated the same as all of our HQ staff in the ONS, but they are actually quite a different community of people. Their terms and conditions are quite different. So we're looking at how we recognise the work that they're doing in a way that will help us improve our retention. So that's sustainable field operations. The refreshed citizen relationship. So I've mentioned trust a couple of times now. So there are a couple of strands of work that we're doing to do better to communicate with respondents. The first one is how we incentivise them. So that there's always been a body of research about the best ways to incentivise people to take part in our surveys, from monetary incentives to can we put something in the envelope that encourages people to open it so they at least can see the letter that is asking them to take part, to should we be offering them a choice of incentives, to should we be giving them the chance to donate to charity. There's all sorts of different things that we can do. So we've been updating all of our strategy on the best way to spend the money on incentives to get the best bang for our buck. And one of the things we're looking at this year is whether we can do targeted incentives. So historically, we've tended to stick to a kind of macro approach. So we give the same incentive to all of our respondents, whether that's an unconditional incentive that we give to everyone regardless of if they take part, or a conditional incentive which we give to only the people that take part. But we are looking at whether we can target to help improve the representativity of our achieved interviews. So we target the underrepresented groups to encourage them to take part. And we can also give interviewers the chance to offer incentives on the doorstep if they think someone is kind of on the cusp of taking part. We are looking at whether we can give them the ability to use their discretion to offer incentives to help encourage participation. In terms of improved survey and statistical design, we've done a number of different things across some of our other surveys, so not specifically on wealth and assets, but many of you have probably seen some of the stuff that's come out publicly around the progress we're making with the transformed labour force survey, and we've also made quite a significant change and improvement to the way that we do our international passenger survey data collection. And we've set up a new division that is focusing specifically on research and innovation on our social surveys, where we have, over the last kind of 5 years or so, not invested in that, and that has probably contributed to some of the issues that we faced recently. And then this year we have a programme of work that is focusing on the living cost and food survey and improving the questionnaire and the processing on that. And Becca will talk about this in a little bit more detail, but we also have some recommendations from the Office for Statistics Regulation for the Wealth and Asset Survey, so that we're looking at kind of recovery work there. And then more work on those other 2 surveys I mentioned, the TLFS and the IPS. And finally, we've also got that division that I mentioned who are looking at the use of AI and alternative data in our surveys. And then finally, just very quickly on technology improvement, we know that we have challenges around processing, particularly for the Wealth and Asset Survey, where the length of the data collection period is 2 years, and we're trying to concurrently improve processing whilst processing the current data. So we're moving towards all of our surveys using a reproducible analytical pipeline approach, which makes it all much more streamlined and uses open source software. So we've made some progress with a couple of our surveys, and this year are aiming to deliver wraps for the other surveys. So just in very quickly, we've kind of touched on most of this already, but in terms of household finances and why they're key for informing policy and public debate, we know that it's really important for us to understand those 4 key areas: income, expenditure, wealth and poverty, at the kind of big picture level that our table mentioned, but also in terms of exploring inequalities by different characteristics, so region or population groups. It has to be responsive and relevant so that we have a picture of cost of living and financial resilience, and it has to inform policy. So the Wealth and Asset Survey that the team in my division run is a biannual longitudinal survey. So a round is 2 years that aims to gather an accurate picture of the economic position of the nation's households. And up there are some areas that the questionnaire covers, including financial wealth, pensions wealth, household debt, property wealth, etc. And again, we've already covered this, but why is it important? So there's a quote up here: income and consumption are crucial for assessing living standards, but in the end, they can only be gauged in conjunction with information on wealth. So now I'm going to hand back to Becca, who's going to talk a little bit about quality. Is it still me?
Yeah,
it's still me. Streamlined, absolutely smooth. So in terms of the challenges, I've already kind of mentioned these. For WAS, we have that declining respondent engagement and response rates over the life of the survey, and because it's a 2-year cycle, we see that probably more acutely than some of the other surveys do, and that's an industry-wide challenge. So we're getting progressively smaller achieved sample sizes, and this has all been acknowledged and set out in that survey's IEP. We also have survey coverage challenges, so quality isn't just about response rates, and something we try and measure in the wealth and asset survey is the extreme high or extreme low wealth position, but that can be difficult using just a survey. And as I mentioned, we have the challenge of concurrent data processing and pipeline development alongside doing the processing and delivering the data for the round that we're currently processing. So just to give you that picture of response rate so you can see, I've already showed you the chart on this, but the response rate, as you can see, from wave 3, as we called it then, to round 8, which is the latest one we've published, both longitudinal and cross-sectional response rates are going down. So just very quickly, in terms of the latest round that we've published, which was the pandemic period, we had massive challenges with that data. It was more uncertain, and there was, as you know, behaviour changes in the way that people interacted with finances during the pandemic. But we also had operational challenges in that we had to move from face-to-face data collection to telephone, which caused, that's a huge operational challenge. And we therefore also saw biased sample coverage and additional non-response that we hadn't seen before for renters. And then this is the last slide for me, just to kind of share with you some of our longer term thinking about the development of the Wealth and Asset Survey. So we know we need to do some analysis on the effect of those diminishing sample sizes on quality. So what does that mean for bias, representativity, and what does that mean longitudinally? We need to do a focus on that data processing end to end because we want to improve the timeliness of the publication of wealth statistics. And we know that we need to do some questionnaire work to look at the questions that respondents are struggling to answer in advance of future rounds. And then finally, I mentioned longitudinal, but we need to look at whether we're still able to sustain the existing longitudinal design. Is it really giving anybody what they need with the cost that it's taking and those reduced sample sizes and response rates?
Thanks, Jen. So obviously run you quite a bit there on the survey itself. So that data source that we bring in, and I'm sure quite a few people in the room have used and accessed the microdata for your own analysis. But I'll move on now to talking about the statistics we produce. So obviously as the ONS, one of the reasons we collect that data is so that we can bring together that high level picture for Great Britain on wealth. So I'll talk a little bit about where we're at, some of the challenges we're facing, and also what we're doing around the improvement plans, linking back to the kind of economics plan I talked about at the start. So our latest publication was earlier this year that was using round 8 WAS data, so the reference year 2020 to 2022, which, as Jen just mentioned, obviously being the pandemic period, there were some challenges with the underlying data itself. But we also made some further changes or adjustments to the statistics. So some adjustments to the weighting to control for tenure and some aligning with the latest census data. We also, slightly bigger impact as a whole, made changes to the way we estimate pensions wealth based on an independent review. So we worked with the Government Actuaries Department alongside sort of wider stakeholders that use wealth statistics within government and beyond to look at how we do that. I think earlier presentations in the day, and no doubt this one as well, have highlighted that it's quite complicated. And in measuring it, we have to think through what assumptions we make, how we bring it together based on the data sources. So that review looked into specifically what we do on pension wealth. We implemented those changes in statistics earlier this year. The benefit of the approach used was in relation to kind of things like discounting and annuity factors to try and bring some stability to the estimates over time. But that also comes with the effect of, I'm sure as many of us who've worked in any form of statistics will know, when you make a change to your methods, it often comes with that break in time series. So we published an article on the methodological changes in December and then provided more information in the statistics we published in January. I'm not actually going to go into lots of kind of detail on the latest figures and what they show, given I think the focus of today is more on kind of the data sources and what we can bring together and how we can make things different in future. But if the slides are going after, you can obviously find all of that online as well. But what I will talk a bit through now is some of the things that have happened since we published those statistics in January. So the Office for Statistics Regulation, who basically look at sort of all statistical producers, including the ONS and what we do, took forward a review earlier in the year looking at wealth statistics. That sort of followed on from a wider review they did about economic statistics as a whole, part of which then fed into that kind of economics plan I talked about a bit earlier. So the ultimate outcome of that was that we requested and they accepted that the accreditation for the statistics should be suspended and set out a series of requirements that we need to work on in order to regain that accreditation again in future. So firstly, that we will look into publishing a bit more on what we do about comparability with other data sources. So as part of pulling together the statistics for certain aspects of wealth, we will look at what other data is out there to try and triangulate. So they've asked us to just be a bit clearer on that in what we do. I just talked about the fact that the change to the way we estimate pensions wealth also introduced a break in the time series. So they spoke to lots of different users of wealth statistics. Again, some of you might be in this very room. A lot of the feedback was that we understand why you did that. That makes it really hard, right? Because you have broken the time series, and what a lot of people out there want to do is look across a longer time period. So they've asked us to go back and look at that decision again. There's a few different factors there. One of them literally is kind of resource to do that over a long period of time, but also the methodological appropriateness of what we do. So we will be looking into that. They also want us to look at user engagement. So us to develop a user engagement plan. So for the ONS kind of as a whole, certainly for my team, user engagement is always really, really important, but also we need to listen to the feedback we get. The users that the OSR spoke to said that actually they think we could be better in the way we kind of talk and engage with users. So we're going to be thinking about how we can do that and have already started kind of part of that process, which again, I'll come on to in a second. They also wanted us to look at how we communicate quality of the data. So as just sort of mentioned in previous slides, again, it's quite complicated. The most recent round we published was the pandemic period. There are always lots of considerations around data quality, and in the context of surveys and what we're seeing to response rates, that puts a real prominence on making sure that we are communicating that to the best ability we can be. So again, we'll be looking at that further. And then lastly in the list, but in a way not least, because it underpins almost everything, they want us to look at how we resource within ONS the production of wealth statistics. So you'll probably see from the two of us being up here, it's quite a process. We have to design a survey, bring the data in, process that data, then produce the statistics, analyse the statistics. What is it all saying? There's a big sort of production chain there. So for us to go and have a look at that really and make sure we've got our resource in the right places to focus on the right things that will bring the quality back up to the level needed by users. So I'll talk a little bit now about effectively where we're at on some of that and some of the things we are focusing on at the moment. So I just talked about user engagement. We launched a wealth expert group relatively recently to try and bring together a bunch of people that know a lot about this data and have used it for lots of different purposes because we want to be communicating sort of where we're at, what we are focusing on and our priorities. We also want feedback on that too, and frankly, their expertise of people that can help us to make things better in the future. We, as part of that, and a little beyond it too, have been gathering questionnaire feedback for round 11 data. So the survey that will be in the field for 2026 to 2028 to make sure we are focusing on the right things. For those of you that have seen the questionnaire, it's quite a long one. So one of the things we have been really trying to look at is quite challenging to add things, given some of that, what we talked about before about things like survey burden on respondents. So really taking that close look of, is everything needed and what things might we need to tweak a bit. in order to make sure that we are measuring wealth as a whole in the right way. And we have also, going back to what I talked about around the pensions wealth estimation change, released the annuity factors so that users of the microdata can do what they want to do with the analysis with it. And then looking ahead, so we will be looking at updating the quality information we provide as per the OSR requirement. And more crucially, there is more we know we need to do. So we are pulling together a broader plan for the recovery of household finance statistics, including wealth as a whole. And that's where we want to be working with sort of our users and this very room as well to basically get feedback on that and the sort of areas where we think we should be focusing on in future to, if Jen used the phrase, most bang for our buck. That's really important right now in a kind of context of constrained resources. Are we focusing on the right things, and where we maybe do need to make trade-offs about what we do focus on, can we do that in an informed way with the feedback of people that use our statistics for really important things, informing decisions and producing research that helps to make the country better in future. So very important to us. We've talked for a bit, and I know we're now moving on to a kind of wider discussion section, I think, kind of in the way the morning session runs. So just thank you for listening to both of us for now, and we'll pause there.
But what has happened then is that the ONS has lost the trust of many of its users. And I think there's sort of three things in there that have driven this loss of trust. The first one is too many errors, and we've talked about those. And then they're understandable sometimes. Anyone who's read Devereux will understand the resource challenge that's been there, the issues about poor financial management, dare I say it, the silos that may still exist in an organisation where a merger was completed about 30 years ago, and so on. But there's been things have gone wrong. And I think in terms of the loss of trust, this has been compounded by two things. First of all is too much defensiveness. And that's been a lack of willingness to recognise shortcomings in the data. The ONS, when criticised from outside for the quality of data, has, until recently, seemed to adopt a knee-jerk reaction of, we're okay, we're not going to look at that, it's fine, we're the world-class statistical institute. So this defensiveness, sometimes in the face of overwhelming evidence that there are issues with the data, has not been helpful. And at the same time, and it ties in with the defensiveness, is a lack of transparency, particularly about being clear about shortcomings in the data. That I think the user community of official statistics understands that this is a hard thing to do, that the environment is difficult, but what it would like is a clearer understanding of, yes, this is what we've done our best, and these are the things that we would recognise as being the weaknesses in our data. So we're in this position where the ONS needs to rebuild trust. There was a guy called Ivan Falaby who for many years was the chief statistician in Canada, and he was a very interesting, thoughtful guy. And he had a thing, I can't actually find the precise quote, but it's broadly the idea is that because outsiders can't really validate the official statistics as much as they would want to, the trust in official statistics is as much trust in the producers of official statistics as in the data themselves. So what we need to do is to rebuild this trust is to do several things. First of all, what we've heard a lot about is improvements in the core products. Okay, let's get this right. Let's get the metrics that we can understand, like response rates and so on, up. But it needs to be combined with greater openness. What are we doing? What is actually happening? And then the better interactions with the wider user community. And actually, I think we had a great example just now of some of those better interactions coming. So I see that as a positive. So we heard today about the plans for ONS economic statistics and the survey improvement and enhancement plan. And I see both of these as being hugely, hugely welcome. But because I'm a statistician who hangs around with academics, there's some caveats associated with that. So much of the focus is necessarily on internal systems. ONSIT has probably been a long-running saw for about the last however long the ONS has been going, 30 odd years, and issues about capability and capacity in teams and so on are also very long running, and it's great to see some very concrete plans to do that. So, but as I hinted, I think focusing on internal systems will only take part of it. Some of the conversations I've had recently in the wider world question whether the existing product set in the Plan for Economic Statistics is too narrow and only meets the requirements of government and Bank of England users. Now, I also hold a role in the Royal Statistical Society, and in that role I am mandated to mention the household cost indices, which are not mentioned in the Economic Statistics Plan, but would be an enhancement of the price data should they get accreditation, which they should do if the effort's put in. But it is this concern that we're going back to a world where governments and the Bank of England are prioritised beyond the wider user community. And that drives the next thing, the need to ensure that the engagement is meaningful two-way. There's a sort of an accountability model that I think the OSR have consulted on in their latest consultation on the Code of Practice, which talks about giving an account, being held to account, and then putting things right when things go wrong. That conversation needs to be there across the range of stakeholders within official statistics. But I think there's also a desperate need for external facing culture change. There's a lot in Devereux about internal culture, but the way the ONS has faced the world is also challenging. But I'm going to say I've already seen a change. James Benford, who is the new Director General for Economic Stats and other things, has started blogging, writing on LinkedIn in a very open and constructive way about the challenges that the ONS is meeting. And that, without being too cruel, I don't think would have happened under the previous leadership of the ONS. So I hugely, hugely welcome that, and I hope we will see much, much more of this, with the specific user groups being targeted with very honest and open communications. I'm going to say something about surveys now. So I first did a presentation, I think 30 years ago, where I talked about the declining survey response rates for ONS surveys. And the reasons were pretty much the same as we're hearing now. Personal view, yes, there's a lot that can be done, and I think Devereux made the point that I think some of the issues were internal to the ONS and not necessarily met by other countries. So there is work that can be done to improve survey response rates. But frankly, I think it's only going to get harder. I think we can talk good stuff, but we're the lack of trust in government, small g government, is growing. The level of disengagement will only make things worse, and so we need to continue to focus on the exploration of the alternatives to the traditional survey message. And then finally, and very specifically on wealth and assets, I love that quote from Stiglitz et al. It was 2009. Okay, the world has changed a lot in the last 16 years. We have basically had real incomes being stagnant, whilst those with assets have seen their asset values rise. And that has huge consequences for society, the wealth effect in terms of spending, consumption, and so on, and differential impact that has on different groups. And so this data, I think, is really, really important to get right so we can make the policy decisions associated with it. Related to that is, I think, understanding who is responding and who is not responding is absolutely key. Whereas I think we had a hint of that in the previous conversation, a hugely skewed distribution of wealth, and actually trying to get this right is a biggie. And finally, as I hinted, I don't think that survey data alone can do this. I'm slightly disappointed by the conversation this morning because I don't think we've come to the conclusions of where this great source of untapped data is that we could use to measure wealth. But there is data that could be used, and I think we need to be smart with the data, with the use of data. And I mentioned the idea of using synthetic estimation as a way forward, but there are other ideas that might enter the room. So thank you.